In today's episode, we're going to be covering simple steps to get your little to write a sentence. If you don't already know who I am, I'm Dr. Deanna. I was in the classroom for over 20 years teaching littles K through 3 how to read and write, amongst other things like mathematics. Currently, I'm a homeschool mom that's about to retire because I'm going to graduate my homeschooler. And during my career in education, I earned my doctorate in curriculum and instruction from the University of South Carolina. So with no further ado, let's dive in how to teach your little to write a sentence with some very simple, easy steps and simple materials. That's important. You don't need to spend a bundle and it doesn't need to be complicated. That's the great news. All right, for this activity, I highly recommend that you have a whiteboard of some sort. You don't have to use a whiteboard. I find that it tends to be a little less intimidating because if there's a mistake that's made, it's so easy to erase and you don't have to worry about burning a hole in the paper. It can just make that task less overwhelming for the parent and the child or a teacher. I know. All right, so also some cubes or blocks. In my case, I'm using magnetic blocks, but that's because it's easier for me to show you how to do this because I can just hold it up. But for your purposes, if you want to use Legos or whatever you have on hand, that will work just as well. And of course, a whiteboard marker so that you can write on the whiteboard. All right, let's get going. My first step is a bit of a surprising one to a lot of people, and that is I first tell children the sentence. And the reason why we do that is because it helps the child to process what they're going to write. Eventually, right, they're going to be writing their own sentences, and they create that in their head. But for this purpose, when we're using a dictation type activity, we really want to give them time to process the sentence that we're giving them. So the sentence that we're going to do today is very basic. I'm going to use some beginning sounds, some first sounds that a child would be very familiar with. And I'm going to be using some very basic, what I call heart words. Some people call them sight words. I teach them in a little different manner. And if you're interested in that, you can check out my other videos where I talk about not teaching sight words. But in any case, this sentence is going to be very basic and very simple because I want the child to focus more on the process of writing. We're going to focus on making spaces between the words and things like that. So again, we don't want to make this very overwhelming. A very simple sentence is the way to start. The sentence today that I'm going to demonstrate for you is, I see the dog. I would say the sentence, I would have the child repeat, and then to get a little interactive, to feel the learning, I'd have them clap. All right, here we go. We're going to clap each word in the sentence. I see the dog. That allows them to feel the words and give a little definition to each individual word in a sentence. Because remember, right now, when you say a sentence out loud, it's abstract. And you're asking a child who is still in a very concrete phase of life to take that abstract sentence that's out there and now put it onto, well, in this case, a board, but to give it a concrete structure. So that's helping to bridge that over. Then, just for a little added activity, I usually have the kids tap the word. So I would get out my tapper. I see the dog. So we've clapped it, we've tapped it, and now we're going to write the sentence. So there's a couple of things I always make sure to point out to children. And if you can take notes on this, that would be great. So you remember this when you go back, or save these clips so that you can go back and revisit this information. There's something called concepts about print. Concepts about print are things that as adults, we take that information for granted. We know that we start over here, that we go this way when we write. We know all of those things. But for a child, that can be new information. If they've had it modeled for them a lot, then they may be really familiar with that and just already be in the know. But we want to be very direct with children to make sure that there are no gaps. So I would say, all right, when we start our sentence, we start over here and we go this way. And you've given them that very important concept about print, so they have that, tuck it in their brain, and here we go. We also always start our sentences with an uppercase. In this case, we have a word that is always uppercase. And when I was in the classroom and when I worked with my boys when they were littles, I always pointed this out to them that this word was uppercase for two reasons. It was at the beginning of a sentence, but also it always is uppercase, and that's because it's the word I. Don't worry, you can explain that to kids. They can absorb it. They are little sponges. All right, here we go. I. At this point, we're not worried about indents or anything like that. You take your cube, I. Let's get out my magnetic board. All right, guys, little scene change as I realized I didn't have a magnetic board and I need one so I can show you. All right, basic stuff, right? Here we go. So I already told my child they're going to start over here. They're going this way, and I introduced them to the first word. We're going to go ahead and write that I. Now, in order to put a space between our words and to really make that concrete for children, that's where the blocks come in. I put a block right there, and they can see that there is a space between the words. I, now my next word is see. S-E, see. Ooh, I heard a S at the beginning. And so I'm thinking aloud and I'm helping the child create that narrative in their brain. And eventually you won't need to do that. They'll do that for themselves. But it's very, very good to help them model it for them. And it's called thinking aloud. I see. I hear that S, so I'm going to put an S. See. Ooh, I hear the E, and it's long sound. And I know that that's the E twins in this word. Now, if they happen to use just one E, you could say, what's another way that we might see the long E if they've been exposed to that concept, or if you've talked about the phonics of the word see. I see. All right, put another cube to help them put that space between the words. I see the. And the is a word that we introduce as a heart word while still explaining the phonics. I see the. Uh-oh, I don't have room to write a whole nother word. And this again goes back to those concepts of print. We want to go this way. So when we get to the end of the line and we have no more room, but we still have sentence, all we need to do is go shoop. And that's how I explain it. I see the dog. Again, we have a 3-sound word, d-a-g, dog. I know that I hear a d at the beginning, so I'm going to write the letter D that goes with the d. Stretch it out to hear that middle sound, dog. I hear the O in the middle, dog. I hear the G at the end, so I put the letter G. And that is where that segmenting comes in and stretching it to hear that middle vowel. Vowels are amongst one of the most confused groups of letters for littles because they sound very similar, and even the placement of the muscles in our mouth is very similar. So in order to help prevent that confusion, stretching and singing out the word helps with that. All right, you might go back. I see the dog. That's the end of my sentence. I need to put a period because the period tells us to stop. If you want to, you can go back and you can choose to put this cube here if you want to. It's not entirely necessary because you did have to do that, what we call return sweep. But also now you can take those cubes off and you see those spaces between the words. And if the child needs a little extra reinforcement in understanding spaces between words, you might even have them go back and circle the words. I see the dog. One last step, which is completely optional, but it's something called metacognition, and that is to have a child reflect upon their work, and you're planting those beginning seeds of self-reflecting and checking their own work. We would go back and check. Do we have a capital? Check. Do we have the period at the end? Check. Great work. And there you have it. Those are some simple steps, a lot of information I know, but it is a very simple process once you get used to it. Feel free to go back and rewatch this, take notes. And if ever you skip a step or you mess up, don't worry, you are doing fine. Just the fact that you're here learning about how to help your child with this skill means that you are on the right track. And with that, I encourage you to subscribe. Like I say, you're already here, so you might as well, because I have tons more information just like this coming your way. And I'll see you next time when I teach your super learning strengths, one child and family at a time.